Hello, intermediate algebra students. Today we are going to be looking at 5.2 now. We're going to be starting that. Um, Hopefully you guys are able to take advantage of the workday and the resources on there and hopefully make a little sense of 5.1. I know Friday you ended up with not a lot of work time with the two videos. If not, keep working on that. Try to get 5.1 wrapped up or at least understood better as we move along here. We're not going to be going too quick. As you can see, we've got day one. We're going to spend a couple days on this section two. These are some tough ones. These are some tough sections here, some tough concepts that we're learning, and there's some heavy lifting involved in here. So today, to introduce what we're doing with parallel and perpendicular lines, just to kind of talk about a couple different things, general information about both of these. Parallel lines. So that's when you're looking at two lines that are going forever and ever in the same direction, in both directions. We label them with these special little marks that you won't see a ton of till geometry, but that marks that we have parallel lines. They're going forever and ever in the same directions. They never cross, they never touch. Now, what's neat about them and what we're going to take advantage of with and work with today about parallel lines is the fact that their slopes are equal. So parallel lines have exactly the same slopes. So you got two lines, you have the equation to both lines, their slopes are exactly the same. Okay, so in an equation, that might look something like, let me just extend this line here a little bit. In an equation, that might look something like this, where you've got maybe one of your equations to be y equals 3x plus 4. You've got that y-intercept of 4 and the slope of 3. A parallel line would have an equation like this, where that y-intercept is going to be different because they're different lines are at different spots, but the slopes are exactly the same. Okay, or something like y equals negative 1/2 x plus 5. A parallel line to that would say y equals negative 1/2 x, maybe minus 6, whatever. But you notice that the slopes, that number in front of x, is exactly the same. So now perpendicular lines, this is where things get a little tricky. So perpendicular lines, a lot of people say that, oh, they cross. Well, yes, they cross, but they're very special kind of lines that cross. They meet at a 90-degree angle. They make a perfect T. So perpendicular lines look like that. They make that 90-degree angle. Here's the thing about their slopes. Slopes are opposite reciprocals. Oops, spelling that one wrong. Opposite reciprocals of each other. So what are opposite reciprocals? Well, opposite means that you're flipping the positive negative, right? So opposite means if it was positive, it turned to negative. If it was negative, it turned to positive. So the word opposite refers to the positive and negative of a number. Now the reciprocal is the tricky part here. So reciprocal is, for example, 3/4. The reciprocal would be, you just flip the fraction, would be 4/3. Now, whole numbers we end up with a lot of problems with. If you have a number like 5, its reciprocal is going to be 1/5 because whole numbers are technically like 5/1. Okay, so slope of perpendicular lines is the opposite reciprocal. It means both those things are happening when we're talking about the slopes of perpendicular lines. So when you've got a slope of, or I should say an equation of, let's say, whoops, okay, an equation of, let's say, y equals 2/5x minus 3. Well, a perpendicular line would have negative, since the top one is positive, and then flip the fraction, 5/2, and then that would be the slope of a perpendicular. Okay, so that's kind of the base information about parallel and perpendicular slopes. Now, these first couple questions you're going to encounter today, no work involved. The equation is there for you. It's already in y equals mx plus b. Remember, in y equals mx plus b, the slope-intercept form, this is the only, not the only form, but this is our main form of equation where we're going to be getting the information of slope. It's the easiest to get to if you're not already there when you start. So your slope is just whatever is right in front of the x, and it's exactly that number. So your current slope is negative 5 over 2. So the slope of a parallel line will be exactly equal to that. Exactly negative 5 over 2. It is the exact same thing. And then the slope of a perpendicular line, okay, remember, so opposite means the positive and the negative flip. Reciprocal means you flip the fraction. So like 2, so in this case, well, let's just say 2 over 3 becomes 3 over 2. So in this case, it starts as a negative number, so it's going to become a positive when you answer it. You don't have to put a positive sign. Just not having a negative there means it's positive. And then flipping it to be the reciprocal from 5 over 2 to 2 over 5. So now it is positive 2/5, and you can see that it is the exact flipped and opposite value of the negative 5/2. That's all you're doing for these first couple questions. Let's talk another one quick. Okay, 3 is your slope right now. So what's the slope of a parallel line? Exactly the same thing, 3. Okay. Now the reciprocal of that, technically, remember 3 as a fraction is 3 over 1. So the reciprocal, when you flip it, would make it 1 over 3. And it started as a positive number, so the perpendicular slope flips to a negative. And then the reciprocal makes 1 over 3. Okay? So that's all you're doing for those first couple. Then you get into this situation where essentially the questions are asking you, they're the exact same questions, but we're not starting in slope-intercept form. We are starting with that y not alone. So we have to do a couple things to get y alone. Right? Well, we're basically just solving this equation for y. This is why we did all that work solving equations with different variables, so that we'd be prepared for things like this. That's exactly why we did those things. So the first thing you have to do, let's kind of check back into our solving equations brain here, is we need to get everything away from the y. So the first thing I'm going to do, I've got to get rid of that entire x term. I'm not solving for x, so I'm not going to divide by negative 3. I need to move the whole thing. So I'm going to do the opposite of a negative 3x, and I'm going to add 3x to both sides. So it cancels out. And now I've got a negative 8y still there is equal to, now you could either put negative 1 plus 3x, or you could put negative 8y equals 3x minus 1. Does not matter which one you put. If you want to bump the negative 1 over and put the 3x first, doesn't matter. But make sure you understand that those two cannot combine. Like we saw when we had multiple variables and we were solving for like a when b, c, and d were in there. You just can't combine anything on that other side. Okay? So then we go down to try and go ahead and finish our solving for y. And I'm going to divide by that negative 8 because I need to get that number away from the y value. Right? So I'm going to divide by negative 8. You are dividing everything by negative 8. Okay? So that negative 8 is gone. You end up with y all by itself. Now here's the deal with this thing. It's going to be ugly every time. But all we're concerned with is the value that is with the x. So this negative 1 over negative 8 to 1/8, it's ugly. You don't even have to worry about that, okay? What we're concerned with is when we get this now 3, so positive 3 over negative 8x. Now remember, when you have a negative in there, the whole fraction is negative, so you're basically just having negative 3 over 8x. So these ones are tricky. These ones are going to be tricky. Please don't give up if you try a couple and you're not getting it and the answer's not right. They're going to be tricky because they're not nice values, okay? The slope is the number that's in front of x, and it's right there. So you've got a negative 3 over 8 is going to be the slope of a parallel line because it's exactly the same. And then the slope of a perpendicular line, well, the initial slope is negative, so your perpendicular slope will be positive. And then you flip that fraction instead of 3/8, it's going to be 8 over 3. So definitely the hard part with these questions is this whole process up here. Okay, so let's do one more of those. Excuse me. Let's do one more of those here. We're gonna draw the line for solving. Okay, so again, I got to get my y all by itself. So moving everything else, I have to get that 3x out of there. I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides so that it cancels. So now I've got the positive 4y alone equal to, again, you could put negative 3x plus 8, or you could have it as 8 minus 3x. It doesn't matter which one of those you have. You could have either one of those expressions on the right side. But as long as we understand this next step, the tricky one, when you divide by 4, you're dividing everything by 4. You're going to end up with y all by itself, which is what we're after. Excuse me. Negative 3 over 4x. So at negative 3 over 4, it can't be simplified or changed at all. That's just going to be your term in front of x, and that's perfect. And then that 8 over 4 is going to simplify to 2, which doesn't really matter for what we're doing, but you get a plus 2. So we got a nice equation here. Again, the slope, all that matters right now. The slope is sitting in front of that x. So the slope of a parallel line, remember, is exactly the same. So exactly negative 3/4, that exact same thing is your slope. Perpendicular slope, it goes from negative to positive, and you flip it from 3 over 4 to 4 over 3. And that's it. So again, the process of getting your y alone in these couple is definitely the hard part. But then you just answer those two questions, and we'll get a good amount of practice in with those. And then the last one, finding slopes between these points and then comparing all the slopes. So I've got about 3 minutes left here. I know this might go a little quick, but I have to get this in here before the end of the video. So we've done this. You are finding the slope between these 3 points. So let's just talk about, remember, the change in y over the change in x. So for the first one, we're going to take one y, subtract the other, 4 minus negative 8, over the x, the same x as the first y, minus the other x, so negative 1 minus negative 5. Well, 4 minus negative 8 is adding, so 4 plus 8 is 12. And then negative 1 plus 5, after you switch those signs, is going to be 4. So you end up with 12 over 4. This is where we have to be simplifying, so we make sure we can answer these correctly. 12 over 4 simplifies 3 over 1. You can write it as a whole number 3. Either one of those is going to be useful for when we're comparing here in a second. So all you're doing is that process a few times. So that's the slope of your first line. The second one here, your y is subtracted, so 7 minus 1 over, on the bottom for the x is going to be 2 minus 0. So let's simplify. 7 minus 1 on top is 6. 2 minus 0 on the bottom is 2. Again, simplify all the way down. 3 over 1, that's going to equal 3. That's your slope for line 2, and you might already be seeing what's happening with line 1 and line 2 there. And let's finish this off and get all the slopes. So negative 3 minus negative 7. And then negative 6 minus 6. We've got negative 6 minus 6 more. Okay, so negative 3 minus negative 7 is really negative 3 plus 7, which is going to end up as 4. It's like 7 minus 3. Then negative 6 minus 6 more will give you negative 12. So if either number in a fraction is negative, if one or the other is negative, then the whole fraction is negative. And 4 over 12 simplifies to 1/3. And that is your simplified fraction and slope. So then what you're doing is you are just comparing the 3 slopes. Okay, so let's write them down here so we don't have to keep scrolling. So line 1 had a slope of 3. Line 2 had a slope of 3. And line 3 had a slope of negative 1/3. And you're just comparing them. So line 1 and line 2, that's looking at these two. They're both a slope of 3, which makes them parallel. Boom. Line 1 and line 3, they're comparing on the second one. Positive 3 and then negative 1/3, which is flipped. That's a negative reciprocal, so they're perpendicular. And then 2 and 3, same thing. Positive 3, negative 1/3, perpendicular. they don't have to be parallel or perpendicular. Like if you have a slope of 3 compared to like 1/4, they're not parallel or perpendicular. So that's it. I got like 3 seconds.